Good afternoon and welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions, brought to you by the Labyrinth Society and with your host, Christiana Brinton. Today I'm speaking with Lea GoodeHarris, creator of the well-known and copyrighted Santa Rosa Labyrinth pattern that she designed in 1997. If you are joining us on this GoToMeeting session, please mute your sound by clicking on the microphone icon in the upper left of the GoToMeeting control panel that will appear on your computer screen once you log in. If you call in by phone, you will not see this. You can unmute yourselves and ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of the interview. Find the GoToMeeting invitation posted on the TLS Facebook page, the TLS Facebook Global Group, and on the TLS website under resources/media. And then you have to go in there to click on the Many Paths, Many Visions link, and that will lead you to the invitation. So this episode is entitled Seeking the Heart of the Labyrinth. My guest, Lea GoodeHarris, is a well-known figure in the international labyrinth community. She is a designer and builder of labyrinths, an author, and a frequent guest speaker at labyrinth events around the world. Greetings, Lea. Welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Christiana, I am so happy to be here with you. And anyone else that is here joining us, it's just really a pleasure. Thank you.
You are very welcome. It is just such a pleasure to have you on Many Paths, Many Visions. Finally, I don't know if you remember, you were a guest on my personal podcast show back in early 2000 at Labyrinths in the News in October of 2009. So it's been a decade of transformative work and adventures for you since then. So it's so great to catch up with you and share your evolving labyrinth interests.
Thanks, Christiana. Yes, I cannot believe it's been 10 years. And it was so good to see you this last October at the Labyrinth Gathering outside of Chicago, Illinois, and to rekindle our friendship and connection around labyrinths. A lot has happened in those last 10 years, so it's really great to be here.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's been happening.
Okay.
Great. Let's talk about the title of the episode, Seeking the Heart of the Labyrinth, because I think it speaks to the central theme of your labyrinth ministry, and I'm going to call it that, very, very specifically, very intentionally, because for the past 20 years, it's exemplified in that wonderful space in your Santa Rosa Labyrinth design, that heart space area. So talk about the seeking the heart of the labyrinth.
It really is the heart space in the Santa Rosa Labyrinth, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the creation of the Santa Rosa Labyrinth. Really has ended up being a focus for me in my personal life, kind of how I go about creating, making labyrinths, connecting with other people. There's been this focus of attention to the heart. And in a lot of the ancient philosophies, there were some cultures that even felt that the main intelligence of the body resided in the heart. And current science has actually even proven now that there's glial cells, which are brain cells, that are in the body of our heart. So there truly is an intelligence that resides in the area of our heart. And because labyrinths inherently help us connect to our breath, to our body, to our feet or fingers if you are not able to walk, just all of our senses immersing into the archetype and the connection of the labyrinth, it really speaks to that area of our body, of the intelligence of the heart. No matter what labyrinth you're in, every labyrinth to me has heart, and every labyrinth has the possibility of helping us, no matter the design, no matter the pattern or where you are, to connect to your own heart.
That's juicy. There's a lot to talk about that. This whole idea of intelligence, heart intelligence, and
Yes.
and as distinguished from mind intelligence. You know, and I'm
Right.
going to say mind rather than brain, because the brain is just the housing. So rather than mind intelligence, this is heart intelligence and the distinctions between those. Do you want to talk
Well,
a
and
little bit
then
about that?
another really important thing too is then our gut, down in our intestines. So you've got the mind, the heart, and the gut. And if you think about it, you can separate out all three of them. You know, we talk about, oh, I had a gut reaction. Oh, I had I had this gut intuition. But when you begin to align the mind, the heart, and the gut, I think that taps into our whole DNA, our whole meaning of being human here on this planet. And it really excites me. I really feel that the labyrinth has really helped me to have an awareness of this intelligence that runs throughout my entire body. So it's lining those three up with the heart being at the center.
Is there a comparison to this whole idea of the masculine, feminine side? The masculine and energy is compared to the feminine in that we
Yep.
all have in our bodies, and that need that the more we become into alignment and use both equally, but and then so is this not connected to these three centers? This whole
No, it's very much connected, I believe. I mean, I don't know of anything right offhand that writes about the connection of the three and then the right and the left, or the feminine and the masculine. But to me, it makes absolute sense that if we have left brain, right brain, and then that intelligence is connected throughout our body, I just feel that that is another roadmap of understanding our potential as humans.
There's so many ways to experience. The human body is an extraordinary piece of creative engineering on the part of spirit, God, whatever you. I mean, you know, you have we just talked about two. You have the chakra system. You know, you have the acupuncture, the pressure points, and the acupuncture.
Right.
You have the nervous system and the spinal cord. It's quite extraordinary how all of this works together to allow to function and and continue to move to higher levels of functioning, or more cleaner or clearer or lighter, whatever the term whatever the adjective you want to use, levels of functioning. The more that we come into balance and are aware of these different, the interplay of all these different systems and processes the way our system, our bodies work. It's really, really quite extraordinary. Let's get back. Let's go to the Santa Rosa design. Your website, creativelabyrinths.com, explains the origin of the Santa Rosa design and the creative process you experienced. And I think the listeners would love to hear you describe this. Can you please share this experience with our listeners?
I would be glad to. And I would just encourage anybody listening to this who have heard me talk about the Santa Rosa Labyrinth and the making of the Santa Rosa Labyrinth to just see if you can notice or be curious about something new that I might say today in talking with you, Christiana. There were many threads that led to my actually making the Santa Rosa Labyrinth. You have to remember that this was 22 years ago, and at that time, it was beginning to grow. From when I walked I was in Chartres Cathedral in 1981, but consciously walking my first labyrinth was in 1993. And at that time, there was only a handful of books and very scholarly dry books. There was the Hermann Kern, which was still in its original German edition. And there was just a beginning pocketful of people that we were learning we're interested also in these incredible designs. So walking the labyrinth at Grace Cathedral for 2 years, every other weekend with Kimberly Sayward and one of our classmates, Laura Lopez. And you have to remember, this is before Kimberly met Jeff, and a good 5 years before Kimberly met Jeff. And that was really our teacher of the labyrinth. There weren't any facilitator trainings. There weren't any workshops. And it was our walking the labyrinth that really taught us, was our main teacher about what the labyrinth meant to us. So I had finally gotten to go to one of the early gatherings. It was in 1996 up in New York at the Omega Center. And that's where I met for the first time many people that, 20, almost 25 years later, are still dear, dear friends. And I met Robert Foray. I met Jeff Sayward. I met Richard Feather Anderson, who we joked about. He was living in the town 10 minutes away from me here in Santa Rosa, but we had to go clear across the United States to actually meet each other. So that's always been kind of funny for him and I to reminisce about. But it was Richard who taught me how to make the Flower of the Heart mandalas. And so I had begun a practice of making these mandalas and coloring them in. And at the same time, we were walking the labyrinth at Grace Cathedral, the Chart design. And I had this experience one day that it felt like the labyrinth literally pushed me out as I got towards the end. I felt this upwell of energy and I felt pushed out. And my labyrinth friend and colleague, Marilyn Larson, says, actually, I was birthed out. And I heard these words, go home and write your dissertation, because I was working on my doctorate at the time. And that was a whole struggle in itself to get through that initiation. And what I did was continue to color these Flower of the Heart mandalas. And then Richard and I were going to be doing a labyrinth installation up at the Angela Center. It was actually going to be my very first public installation at a private retreat center. And I was looking through my Herman Kern book and my Penelope Reed Dube book for ideas, because I knew there were other designs other than the classical labyrinth and the Chart 11th circuit design. We needed something smaller. And it was in looking through Penelope Reed Dube's book, actually on page 49, that I noticed that the scribe that had drawn the labyrinth had used a compass. You could see the dot in the center and the concentric rings. And I immediately felt this upwelling inside of me, this creative urge. I wonder if I could make a labyrinth. And I got out my compass and black papered notepad and drew 8 circles. And just this upwelling kept happening as I was putting in the cross lines for the half and quarter turns. And within minutes, I could run my pencil through almost the entire labyrinth except for the lower left quadrant. And I tried to figure out what was happening. And when I tried to figure out what was happening, this creative upwelling went away. It so freaked me out. It was so visceral in my body. I kind of backed away and I felt that upwelling again. But it was such an unknown feeling that I could feel my mind trying to figure out what was happening, and then the creativity just went away. So I put my pad and pencil down, didn't quite know what had happened, and went about my day. And that evening we had company over and we were sitting in our living room talking and chatting. All of a sudden, I felt that creative upwelling again, picked up my pad and pen, which were sitting there on the coffee table, and it was as if everyone in the room just disappeared. And I made just a couple of erasures and I added a new line on that lower left side. and my pencil went through the entire design. And I was stunned. I was like, what just happened? Is this a new labyrinth? Is it an old labyrinth? I didn't even know how to think about what to do with what had happened. So I'm so grateful that I had met Jeff Sayward and felt comfortable enough to write to him. And he so graciously wrote back to me. And that's another little caveat here that's so important. If you think about it, there weren't any cell phones. There was no instant messaging. There was no capacity to, shoot pictures back and forth around the world in an instant. There was only pen and paper. And so I wrote to Jeff, and he graciously wrote me back and said, no, actually, he had never seen this particular design before in any of his forays into design in the labyrinths. And Jeff is pretty much knows everything there is to know about design. He did say that there was a couple of elements of the Santa Rosa Labyrinth that could be found in two older labyrinths, one from Italy and one actually from England called Syward's Labyrinth, but they were not the same. And as some people know, in my original design, there was no heart space. There was a line that went from the upper left goal of the Santa Rosa Labyrinth down to the lower right hand of the Santa Rosa Labyrinth, and you just entered to the left of that. And I wasn't even calling it the Santa Rosa Labyrinth at that time. That was a whole other thing that happened 3 months after making it, when I made it for the first time on the ground at the ocean with Marilyn Larson, actually. But it was about 3 months later that I was sitting with that design at my desk at work, and I was looking at it, and all of a sudden it was that same upwelling again. I wonder what would happen if I lined up the goal path and the entrance path. And the minute I did that, the heart space opened.
Wow. Wonderful story. I'm sure others who will listen to this have had similar experiences. But it's just wonderful to hear your experience, Lea. And also getting back to the whole mind and heart thing. It's sort of almost fair to say that at that point, at that time, your mind was not in alignment with your heart, which is why your heart stopped sending the creative juices out there when your mind started trying to figure everything out. And I'm sure that now you totally are in alignment, but it's interesting to hear you say that as soon as you start as your mind, and this was, not a conscious thing, your mind starts trying to figure out why is this and how come this is, and why can't I, and why, and then that stops that creative flow. It sort of stopped that creative flow.
Yes. I also liken it to the masculine and the feminine. The masculine is that rational part of our brain. And when I speak of masculine and feminine today, and I may say this again at a later time, I'm not talking about gender or sexual orientation. I'm talking about those attributes that we have until now named masculine and feminine, that is in every single person. And the feminine is a lot of times characterized as nonverbal, intuitive, creative. It's the part of us that speaks in symbols and signs and is connected to our bodies and the cycles of the earth. And then the masculine is that part of us that creates, gives form, gives meaning. We need both of those principles working together, because without form, I can have all the creative upwellings in the world, but without form, nothing will come into birth, into fruition. Form allows the unconscious, it gives us a structure to inform and create something new or recreate something. And if you have just form without that intuitive connection, then you have places that are cold and they have structure, but they lack that heart. They lack that ability to make us. You think about, walking into one of the great Gothic cathedrals as opposed to walking into a concrete square building that has no windows or hardly any windows and fluorescent light. You can see the contrast of building with that creative life force, and then just building because I'm going to, gosh darn it, my will over whatever else I'm feeling inside my body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I misspoke before. I didn't, think as you're talking and we're discussing this, and I'm thinking about this. It's not that the mind and the heart, I think, are always, and the gut are always connected. But if one is used more, if the masculine is used more, then there's almost a lack of faith or trust in when there's an upwelling of the creative energy or the intuitive energy. And so this is a trust issue within ourselves that we have to look at and really, for me personally, and I speak for, and thank God for the Labyrinth, because I don't know if I would have ever experienced this if it wasn't have been for the Labyrinth, that it has helped me create trust. It has helped me build trust between my masculine and feminine sides. And that is a huge thing, that it's over time, there is this a willingness to trust each other. You come up with the juicy ideas and I'll be the one to bring it into form and make it happen.
Yes. Well said, Christiana.
Yeah, I think that is important for people to also, when they're just starting out, that, don't worry, just keep walking. Just keep walking the labyrinths. And it will build organically, this kind of trust in your own body's ability, your own light being ability to come through and create and manifest will happen organically. And I think that's a powerful aspect of labyrinths that people don't really understand.
It's that left and right, moving from the left side to the right side and in different sequences that helps just organically weave that beginning trust for those of us that have had that issue or separation or illusion of separation within our bodies.
Yeah. So let's continue. So you collaborated with Robert Foray and Jeff Sayward, and Richard Feather. You collaborated with Robert Foray and Jeff Sayward, and Richard Feather Anderson taught you how to make Flower of the Heart mandalas with a compass. And you have a wonderful quote from Robert Foray on your website, and I'm just going to read a little tiny bit of that, if you don't mind, because it's just
not at all.
It's about Lea, and he says, over the years I've created many traditional. Nope, that's not it. Sorry. Here we go. That is your writing. So decades ago, Lea and I had many discussions about labyrinths, their origins, and our obligation to make them, nurture them, and keep them safe. Together, we made decisions about finalizing the Santa Rosa pattern, about a license to reproduce, and about other matters pertaining to making labyrinths as a business. But in fact, none of that is the main story. The underlying motivation was always how to get out of our own way and let the power and potential of the labyrinth shine through. Lea recognized that being the originator and caretaker of a labyrinth is both an awesome honor and a great responsibility, a holy appointment that transcends ego and personality. It requires a person of sensitivity, openness, compassion, and yes, love. No one represents these qualities better than Lea. Clearly, she was chosen by some higher power and for some good reason. Her work, her creativity, and her glorious personhood speaks for themselves. But wait, I think I have it backwards. It really has been the labyrinth that has taken care of Lea all these years, a match made in heaven, manifested beautifully in the world.
Aw.
It makes me cry.
I know.
So wonderful.
It really touches me deeply,
Oh
and
my
hearing
God.
you read it. Yeah. Thank you, Christiana. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah. So my question is, was there any hesitation at any point for you that you weren't up to this responsibility? This is this powerful a manifestation, or that you might not be able to get out of your own way. Where does, and we're just talking about this the idea of where heart, trust, and faith coincide with mind. I mean, what was it? Was there a tipping point? Was there a place where you just clearly stepped into it, or was it just this gradual, gentle process of just?
It didn't feel very gentle at the time. It was quite a ride, and still is quite a ride. There are so many different ways I could go with this. I think one of the most important things was there's a couple of places in this. I have my own personal issues around being seen, being recognized, being of service in the world in a way that supports me. It's been some of my life work and will continue to be my life work with or without the labyrinth. But having made the Santa Rosa Labyrinth and having it go out into the world, and at that time, before I copyrighted it, it was beginning to be recognized. And you have to also remember at this point too, Christiana, there was kind of, even though there were other designs in the historical archives of labyrinths, especially like from Kern, there were really two camps in the labyrinth world. There was the classical labyrinth, and then there was the Chart medieval design camp. And the Santa Rosa was the first. I mean, there are other 7 and 6 circuit labyrinths out there, but it was the first contemporary design that had 7 circuits, but the quarter and half turns of the medieval labyrinths. And some people questioned a hybrid and questioned if it was effective and questioned my motivation for making it. And I actually got pushed back against quite forcefully in some areas, and I didn't know what to do with it. And the other thing that began to happen was people began to make this new labyrinth, and they began inserting parts of the Chart design, the rosette in the center and the lunations around the outside. And that just did not feel right to me. At that time, I wanted the Chart design to be known for the Chart design, the classical design to be known for the classical, and I wanted the Santa Rosa to be known for the Santa Rosa with its heart space, as I had come to call that area, because if you think about the 7 energy centers in the body, that space falls on the 4th chakra, the 4th energy center. And it doesn't matter in the classical labyrinth if you use Sig Lonegren's progression of the chakras in the rainbows, or if you use Toby Evans' alignment of the chakras in her system. Both systems, that 4th line is the heart space. So the Santa Rosa Labyrinth was, for me at least, bringing another awareness and focus to the heart. And it felt so important for that to be known for itself. So I had a real dilemma. Robert had seen Sue Ann Foster's rendition of the Santa Rosa Labyrinth that she beautifully made with Ivy. She and I and 3 other women, Kimberly Lowell Sayward and Lalissa Hall and Marilyn Larson, had gotten together a year after I had first designed the Santa Rosa, and we drew it for the first time on canvas. And Sue Ann painted it with Ivy and took it to the very first, actually Marilyn took it to the very first Labyrinth gathering, and that's where Robert saw it. And then Robert contacted me and asked if he could replicate it. And he asked permission, and he asked me if he could pay me a royalty, and he encouraged me to copyright it. And I had a lot of people say to me, you can't copyright a design. You can't copyright a labyrinth. And so I had to really struggle with it. And I actually took that question into the labyrinth. And in walking it, asking, what do I do? And I heard 2 answers. The first answer was I could let it go, just let the design go, and that would be one set of learnings. And the other answer was, or you can go ahead and copyright it, and you will grow in ways you never imagined. And I decided to copyright it. And again, I got a lot of pushback because I had done it. And I've come to see in hindsight that there's another reason. It's not, it may seem ego and it may seem about me, and maybe some of that's true, but it has marked it in the historical record of at least our current culture, which is, you know, copyright in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. There is a copyright for the Santa Rosa Labyrinth. And it's my hope, in hindsight of having done that, that marries the copyright with the story. Because the truth is, we don't know. All these years, all these thousands of years, we don't know how those early labyrinths were made. What were those people thinking? Why did they make them? And how did they use them? I mean, these are the questions I had 25, 30 years ago, and I still don't know the answers to them. I mean, there's now thousands of books on the labyrinth, where there were a small group of people interested in labyrinths 25 years ago. There are now thousands of people interested in labyrinths, and thousands of labyrinths that have been put into the ground that we even know of. There's maybe even more that we don't know of. And we can kind of project our own experience on antiquities and the people of the past. We can, you know, with the master craftsmen like Marty Kermine and Robert Foray and Chuck Hunter and John Ritter and Lisa Moriarty, that are making labyrinths with sacred geometry, we can understand and ask them questions and see how it affects them and what it means to them. But we cannot know that master mason at Chartres Cathedral, why he took a design that was already at least 300 years old, why he chose that one, why he put the rosettes in the center, why he put the lunations around the outside, and why did he add sacred geometry to the design. But I can tell you exactly what happened to me in making the Santa Rosa Labyrinth. There was curiosity. There was my own desire to know myself, to know my place in the world, to know what, you know, I was working on my doctorate. How can I bring my gifts out into the world? And that curiosity is what brought the Santa Rosa Labyrinth into being. And I think with the copyright, it's been my intention is that copyright married with my story, it helps bring it forward into what I hope are future generations.
Mm. Well, I think that this decade has honored the path you've taken, very much so. And especially in your speaking and how you speak of this now, the clarity that you have around this. And I, we would all give our eye teeth to know who those Masons were.
Yes.
And, and what made them choose that particular pattern and combine it with the lunations and the labyrinths and the rosette in the center, et cetera, et cetera. So how great it is that there is that information and that it started a trend. I mean, this started a trend. And so now when people make labyrinths, I mean, we have so much more available to us now to document things. We have drones and we have so much more at our fingertips that we can, so many ways that we can document things. And I think you make a very valid point and a good one, for posterity and for recording. This is there. It is. We know this now, and future generations, or in the next eon, when they dig up the pots or whatever else, they'll have this information.
Hopefully. But it's such a great point of what you bring up, Christiana, because now we have, the internet, and I mean, it's exemplified every day on at least Labyrinth Society, either the global group or the Labyrinth Makers Forum, Pinterest. You can see how people's creativity is burgeoning and how that connection of form and formless is coming together in amazing, beautiful renditions of traditional designs that are completely new. And everything from Lisa Moriarty's Circle of Peace Labyrinth, which is similar to the Santa Rosa with heart space and similar quarter and half turns, to even the heart of chart, as they call it, or the petite chart, as Robert Frey called it. As you start seeing these different renditions coming, it's really, there's something I always say about labyrinths and people that make labyrinths. They think they're making a labyrinth, but in a way they're kind of taking a snapshot of themselves. Because every single person that makes a labyrinth, even if it's the exact same design, there's an element that goes into it that captures their own creativity, their own way of thinking about the world and themselves, and it shows in their installation. And I've been incredibly curious as I watch all these different designs come forward, or my colleagues, the incredible work.
Lea?
Everybody else. And it's just incredible to see these different renditions come forward in their own expressive way.
Yeah, you blanked out there for a couple of minutes, but that's okay. I think luckily, I all of a sudden we couldn't hear you, but just for a couple of seconds there. You're okay now.
Okay, good.
Well, yes, and you've mentioned this in a quote, and I quote you on your website: "Navigating the twisted labyrinths are a path to the heart and soul of our journey through life. Navigating the twists and turns, there is time to allow for new possibilities, discover a different perspective, and come into the present. Labyrinths give us a framework to explore our connection to ourselves and to the world around us," which is what I think you're talking about here, that our new designs are an expression of our exploration of connection to ourselves and the world around us. So, and I really appreciate that, because, I created a design. It's a huge labyrinth, 44 feet, but I know that someday that I'm going to make this as a three-dimensional labyrinth that you can actually walk into down into the center
Wow.
like a tour. And it was definitely, absolutely, completely an expression of my exploration at that time of myself and the world around me, in the interest that I had at the time. So I totally agree with you in that aspect. It's that makes a lot of sense. But in terms of this philosophy, and this is how you see things, and this is how you work in the world. How do you mesh this with the mundane aspects of running a labyrinth business? And you talked about obtaining the copyright, but you have labyrinth products you sell, you have a book you sell, you promote your business. How does that philosophy support that aspect, those in
It's a
the world
great
things?
It's a great question, and it's an important question. And even just before I move into that, I just want to say I just was so moved, Christiana, when you were talking about your own design that you created, because it's that kind of excitement and connection that I think makes a huge difference in the world, more than we could ever even know. And then that kind of ties in to the question you just asked me. What is the mundane? And why is the mundane mundane? Why do we have this separation of having this beautiful connection with walking a path out in nature or in a candlelit cathedral, and then we have this pushing paper and being mired down in bookkeeping? And where have we lost the connection to that creativity in the mundane? And I would say that for myself, I have great support, not only from friends and colleagues, but with my business partner, David Warburg, he and his wife have just been so instrumental in helping me to slow down and listen to what it is I'm doing. If it's writing a contract or writing a letter, how do I bring my heart into those everyday activities? How do I bring this awareness that I've cultivated over the last 3 decades into having a conversation on the phone with someone who maybe I'm even having a disagreement with? How do I get underneath that to a place where the verbal and nonverbal can meet in my heart, in my gut, in my mind, and bring an element of life and aliveness, so that whoever I interact with, the bank, my gardener, the person who sweeps the street, how can I bring that aliveness to all that I do? I don't know if that seems too far-fetched, but it's really what I strive for.
No. I think that no, and I think that that is something that, like, the Eastern religions teach that you have to live, be a spiritual being no matter what you're doing, and express it from that place. Express your beingness, and the more aware you are, the more you're able to do that, and it never, you're always the laughing Buddha, if possible, kind of thing.
Well, and there's the other piece too about, I've done 9-to-5 jobs. I can do 9-to-5 jobs, but they don't make me happy. This makes me happy. Making beautiful spaces and helping people to connect to their own inner creativity, and helping them to create spaces that they then bring their communities to, and help people to connect with what's important to them. That makes me excited. That makes me happy.
That's important too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if that works out, that you can do that, and by doing that, pay your bills and keep a
Yes.
roof over your head, then so much the better. But it's sometimes it's a challenge. It's
It
not,
really is.
yeah, it's not always. We don't live by the time is art paradigm. We live by the time is money paradigm right now on this,
Right.
and so that's a challenge. It's a challenge too, and I think this is where, well, we can talk about this later, but I wanted to ask you, in terms of your clients and your workshop participants, how has this heart-centered ministry impacted them? Maybe you can tell us some stories about the effects, or what people have talked to you or shared with you, if you're willing to.
Absolutely. Um, I know for me, as being a workshop presenter and also speaking, it's really, rather than just giving information, it's my intention to give information that stirs whoever's listening or whoever is interacting with me. So I always have in the back of my mind, I'm always looking for how can I be of service to this person in helping them access their own creativity? How can I be of service to them if we're putting a labyrinth in their backyard, or we're putting a labyrinth in a public space, that it's going to help whoever interacts with me or the installation to tap into their own creativity and their own connection with themselves. And goes back to what we first were talking about. When I have a connection with myself, then I can have a connection with others that is meaningful. So a couple of stories that come to mind are, I'm thinking of this beautiful woman that enlisted my help in putting a labyrinth in her backyard. And she was the main caregiver for her husband of 45 years, who was failing with Alzheimer's. And her intention of putting the labyrinth was so that she could have a space to go and connect with her feelings and her heart as she was dealing with this heartbreaking event in her life of watching this man she loved transform before her into someone she didn't know, and to ultimately let him go. And I've just never forgotten her gentleness, and the thought of working with her to create this beautiful space in her backyard, of how that was going to continue to hold her long after I was gone. And I've thought of her many, many times afterwards. So she touched my heart as well. And then another thing that comes to mind is, as you know, Christiana, and many that will listen to this, was the firestorm that hit Santa Rosa, the north end of Santa Rosa, in 2017, in October of 2017. And I've lost count now, but I know at least 37 families, personally know 37 families who lost their home. And there were over 5,000 homes lost. And including our beloved Angela Center, which was where I had walked my very first labyrinth, and where Richard Feather Anderson and I put that labyrinth in that sparked my making the Santa Rosa Labyrinth. So that building and property was lost as well. But I have 3 clients who I consulted with and helped with installations on their property. And 2 of those clients were right in the center of the firestorm, and their homes survived. And the 3rd client, her main house burned. The guest house, which is a very, very large structure, was not a small structure, was near the labyrinth, and that survived. And I mean, she's in the middle of complete annihilation. I mean, in those areas, for people that don't really know, I mean, it was like a bomb went off and everything was just vaporized. So I've watched how the metaphor of the labyrinth has weaved through these 3 different lives, and how they use the labyrinth to continue to heal and to continue to give them some respite from the reality that they, were 2 years, almost a year and a half out, and still just grappling with what happened to us, as well as grappling, with the loss of Paradise, the town of Paradise last year, and all the smoke that settled in on Sonoma County and Santa Rosa for over 3 weeks. It was almost as bad as when we had the firestorm as well. So we've really had some difficult things to deal with, and the labyrinth has continued to be a solace and refuge for these people that I know, to find something that they can connect with, and their heart and their love of place and their love of family and their gratefulness for their lives.
Yeah, didn't it come close to the Charles Schulz Museum? Almost took out the Snoopy Labyrinth there too, or was that in a different location?
No, it was very, very close to the Schulz Museum. Yeah, that it was just blocks away from it. And that's separate from the fire. The stories I hear from the Schulz Museum of the kids playing in the labyrinth, nothing thrills my heart more than to hear about these kids and the games they make up and the way their imaginations work. And I think that's another piece of doing this work, is when you get to see how people find connection. It's the best thing in the world.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's just like a magnet for kids. That wonderful labyrinth with the nose and the rock for the nose. The rock is the nose, right? And the heart
there's
is
there's a big old giant boulder from the mother lode for his nose, and then there's these beautiful stones that have been crafted in the tradition of the Machu Picchu, in fitting stones together for his eyes, and then you end up in his ear.
So cool.
That was really fun to make.
Oh, I can imagine. So,
and that's also, now there's butterfly labyrinths, there's bear labyrinths, there's dolphin labyrinths, that was another thing that kind of broke the mold for. Yes. We can make labyrinths out of anything.
Yeah. Turtle labyrinths. Yeah, all different kinds. Yes, I know, and it very appropriate for the place and the time and the use too. It's not haphazard. They're doing the very intentionally for what they're being used for, and the audience and the purpose and and the environment. So it's very exciting to see that. So let's say people are taken on the responsibility of stewardship of a labyrinth as a heart-centered practice. And then they find that the interest in walking declines, and maintenance problems arise, or something else arises. Somebody buys the land, and there's a question of whether the labyrinth will stay. Do you have any advice to give to people undergoing these kinds of issues or transitional times or periods? Because I'm sure, given all the labyrinths that you've created, you have experienced this, or you have clients who've experienced this.
Yes, and that's been a hard one for me. And another thing I've really had to grapple with, like one of my other very first labyrinth installations was at the town of Sebastopol Teen Center. And I didn't know anything about setting bricks. I mean, I know a little bit more now, but I'm not a landscaper by design. And I know how important it is now when you are doing a job to bring in an expert in those fields, and not just, you can, in your own backyard, you can do anything you want. And that's really how I learned about making labyrinths, was by my own trial and errors in my own backyard. But when you get into public spaces, I feel you really have a responsibility to bring together a team of experts that can advise on climate, drainage, materials being used, overall long maintenance. Those are things, when you're excited about putting in a labyrinth, you don't always think about. You just think, oh, I'm just going to plop some bricks in the ground. Well, at the teen center, those bricks have now, some of them have disappeared. People haven't kept up their end of the original agreement to keep up the space, and so it's pretty much gone. And in a way, maybe it served its purpose 22 years ago or 21 years ago. And maybe some labyrinths have cycles of being present and then disappearing back into the ground, just as we humans, some of us live a long life, some of us live a very, very short life. And so I've had to recognize that some things just go away. And then I was kind of grappling with this loss around the Sebastopol Labyrinth, because it had great meaning for me. There's a bench there dedicated to one of my dearest longtime friends who lost her son in a car accident. And that labyrinth was built to memorialize many, many teen deaths that had happened the year before, and as a place for people to come and deal with such grief and loss. So I was sad that it had disappeared. And David and I were actually driving back from Marin, where we had been visiting a client, and we'd taken a back road, and all of a sudden the landscape started to look familiar to me. And it was so bizarre, Christiana, because I had completely forgotten that there was another one of my very, very first labyrinth installations back up in those hills at a retreat home, house that was a retreat, bed and breakfast retreat center. And so we drove up there, and not only was it still there, but you could tell it had been walked and walked and walked for the last 24 years. And that what had once been this kind of soft little mound that we built the labyrinth on with boulders, fieldstone boulders, it now was terraced and well loved and well used. So as we know from the historical archives, some labyrinths last the test of time and others disappear and go away. And we have to be ready for that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and those words of wisdom. I think it's hard to let go. It is hard to let it go. So we're almost out of time. There aren't any other people on this live episode to ask questions. So I am just going to ask you this one last question, and then we can wrap this up. What are you most excited about the future of global labyrinth use? And what do you think about all that's happening? And I mean, we've talked about a little bit, you've mentioned something, but what do you see as the future? What do you think the purpose of?
I just continue to see people creating beautiful spaces for people to come and interact with. I see the potential of us as humans of connecting to our hearts and ourselves and with each other. I'm so looking forward to the Labyrinth work gathering this coming year back east. And it's in Baltimore, correct?
Yeah, just outside of Baltimore, correct, yeah.
Just outside of Baltimore. And I'm going to be doing a pre-gathering workshop called The Heart of Placement. And I'm just so excited to get to work with a group of people around finding their own creativity and their own connection with their labyrinth making. So I think there's all sorts of incredible things happening in the labyrinth world that is going to continue to unfold in new ways as more people bring their creativity.
Mm. And so this is one event. This is one of the things I didn't, this is the first that anybody is hearing that you're going to be giving this workshop. It hasn't been publicized in TLS yet because they're still
working.
It
has actually, Christiana. It's on the website.
Oh, it is. Just the pre-gatherings is up. That's right. The pre-gatherings are. They're still working on the concurrent workshop proposals.
Right.
People still have until through March to do that. So that's great news, and that was remiss of me not to look that up and check. But I'm so glad you're going to be presenting. That's awesome. And what about any other events or projects? Do you have anything else lined up?
Yes, I'm going to be speaking to some local groups here, our Rotary Club East, and I'm going to be speaking to our Santa Rosa Garden Club. I'm really excited to bring them labyrinths in the garden. And I'm planning on speaking at the Harvest Festival that's here in Santa Rosa, and continue to work with a couple of projects that I have going in some churches, hospitals, private homes, and maybe a marine center in Florida.
Oh, well, if you come to Florida, because I am moving there.
I didn't know.
Yes, again, I tend to be somewhat of a nomad, but in this case, I'm following my family, and they're all moving to the Miami area. So if that happens in Florida, you're welcome to come stay with me.
Thank you, Christiana. That's lovely.
If it's anywhere near where I'm going to be. Might not be, but if it is. So we're out of time. This is a perfect ending, and it sounds like you have so much going on, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall to all these things that you're doing, and I hope that you put all this stuff on your website so we can follow along with you. So it's just been a pleasure sharing this hour with you, Lea. Thank you so much for joining me today and providing this for our listeners.
And Christiana, thank you. And thank you for this incredible treasure trove of recordings that you've made over the last decade. And that is a gem for all of us in the Labyrinth world. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome, and many continued blessings on your path.
Thank you. You too.
So you've been listening to the Labyrinth Society's Many Paths, Many Visions on GoToMeeting and broadcast by Spreaker with your host, Christiana Brinton. Be sure to check the Labyrinth Society website, media area, Facebook page, global group, YouTube, and Google Plus for a list of upcoming dates and guests. Also, if this podcast has piqued your interest in the Labyrinth Society and you'd like more information about membership, please go to www.labyrinthsociety.org/membership. Many blessings, and may you find what you need on your path through life.